Hello everyone, Oli here, and this is my review of Logopolis, the seventh and final story of the 18th season of classic Doctor Who, starring Tom Baker in his final regular appearance as the Fourth Doctor. Logopolis is a 116 story overall, it's 4 parts long, and is written by the season 18 script editor Christopher H. Bidmead. This is also the second story of the Master Trilogy, and the plot of Logopolis is as follows. The Doctor had. Oh, sorry. The Doctor and Adric head to Earth to fix the TARDIS's chameleon circuit, hoping to restore the new time machine's ability to blend into its surroundings. But once there, they face danger involving a newly regenerated master and a feisty young air hostess in Tegan Javanka. How can people of the distant and mysterious planet Logopolis help? And who is the strange ghostly figure watching the Doctor's every move? So that is the plot of Logopolis. So I think Logopolis, I think personally, is a great story and a great sender for Tom Baker. Although I do think it could have been a bit more epic, but I don't really think it is a bona fide classic as some Whovians make it out to be. But I think it's a very good possible story to say the least. The production of the story was very well done. A good chunk of the story was filmed on location, and I liked how a good part of part one was filmed on the Bionet High Pass. And this has been the reason why they filmed it, because Jonathan Turner thought that. It found out that that was one of the very last places that one of the last police telephone boxes were remaining. But then obviously by the time they started filming there, it was taken away. So they pretty much had to get one of the old TARDIS models to have as a stand-in. And I like the planet of Logopolis itself. It looked very mysterious and looked quite cool as well. And the people of Logopolis, I really like their costumes and stuff and their crazy hair, which looked very alien, so to speak. And obviously, I like the Ferris Project location filming, and the interior set looked really cool, and I loved the exterior how the location filming of that story looked quite cool, and I liked how it was just basically just one big ass telescope, and the special effects in the story were very cool. And I actually liked the beginning how the Doctor was explaining to Adric what the chameleon circuit was. Obviously, it was pretty much done as a bit of filler to try and I think was just there for like the sake of the story. But I really like that scene, so to speak. It was very good for. It was a good way to show the Doctor and Adric's chemistry. But I'll get into that a bit later. But I did like the special effects. I did like how the TARDIS was shrinking at the end of part two, because I think the monitor accidentally used the wrong measurement to like try and repair the TARDIS's chameleon circuit, but it ended up shrinking, and then. And obviously, the Doctor's regeneration looked very cool, and obviously, it looked very cool. It looked very futuristic, futuristic and symbolic at the same time, and I'll get to that a bit more later. Yeah, but I think there was a downside to the special effects, and this is when obviously when the Doctor just fell off the gantry, was literally just about to fall off the gantry, and then we see like the Master standing at the doorway just laughing at him, and it wasn't just the Master, it wasn't just Anthony Indy just standing there, it just pretty much got a cardboard cutout of him just standing there for some very odd reason. The script was very well written, and the direction by Peter Grimwade was very well done. And I think the plot of Logopolis was very good. I loved how dreary the story felt in comparison to most of the stories in this season alone, not just the Tom Baker era. Because even though yes, those stories were quite serious, but Logopolis had this very somber mood to it, which it definitely made the story work. And I like how you can actually contrast Logopolis to Tom Baker's first story, Robot, whereas Robot was a very light-hearted, very energetic story with Tom Baker showing off his comedic skills, and compared to Logopolis, which is very dreary, very somber, very it feels like the end of the world, and you have Tom Baker just dreary, just knowing that his time was coming to an end. I like the contrast between those two stories, so to speak. Entropy, which I said before in my review of the State of Decay, is actually a big theme of the season. It plays a huge part in this story, and as I said before, entropy into regard things decaying, things getting older, things eventually dying, and which became as a result of things just becoming chaotic, and then obviously can't be reversed, and the entropy pretty much comes in form of the entropy wave, which the Master uses to wipe out a good chunk of the planet, including Traken, and he tries to do the same to Earth, but the Doctor is able to stop him before regenerating. And even Logopolis itself, it is very scary and has a lot of scary subtext, such as the Master killing people with his tissue compressor element. So first it was the policeman, then Tegan's auntie Vanessa, and then he randomly starts. I just actually kind of find it funny how the Master just randomly zapping people with the TCE in Logopolis, and how the Doctor, Adric, Tegan, Nissa were just walking around, and the monitors were just walking around Logopolis, seeing like people getting people's corpses, TCE'd corpses. It was just very dark, so to speak. And obviously, the Watcher himself looked very ghastly, and the pacing was very well done. Even though part of the story felt quite rushed, but it worked. But I do think part 4 was rushed a little bit. I'll explain more why I think that in a bit. The aspect was the whole entropy wave pretty much destroying planets. I thought that was quite chilling scene, how it was potentially going to destroy Earth, and that was very dark, so to speak, and that's which pretty much brings the somber theme of the story, so to speak. And I think Logopolis had some incredible moments and incredible cliffhangers as well, especially the part 1 cliffhanger when the Doctor realized that the Master had escaped from Traken, and it pretty much ends on the corpses of Auntie Vanessa and the policeman in part 1 in Vanessa's car, and that was very well done. And I like the part when the Doctor and Adric discovered the Master's TARDIS, or a TARDIS inside their own TARDIS, and the TARDIS that was inside the Doctor's TARDIS was very much the Master's TARDIS, I think, and it was the same police public call box. And I also did like the scene when in part 2 when the Doctor was about to get arrested, and then obviously the Doctor pretty much gives an obvious distraction for Adric, saying that I should need some assistance, and obviously Adric got it. And then I like how Adric pretty much caused the disturbance, or distraction, and he pretty much pretended to like grab a bike and pretend to be injured by it. It was also a very funny scene as well, and how he was like, and he said like, "Oh, help me," and then the policeman came and Adric pretty much just attacked them, and how him and the Doctor just pretty much ran back inside the TARDIS. That was quite funny, and I think it was definitely a good way. This was definitely what you've seen in the Graham Williams era. So I think it's a nice, discreet nod to that, so to speak. You can also Vanessa's death was also quite cool. I did like how she was able to like. She was terrified of us, but I do like how she was able to try and put up a fight by trying to fight the Master with a flat tire, but it was obviously no match for the tissue compression eliminator. And the Doctor's regeneration itself was wonderful. And I'll speak a bit more on that later. And another mini comedy bit was when Tegan was in the Doctor's TARDIS, and then she entered the TARDIS control room, which caused the Doctor and Edric to look at each other as if, what the hell is going on? This was when they were en route to Logopolis, by the way. So on to the acting of the story, which I think was outstanding. Tom Baker was excellent. I do think that Logopolis was definitely his best performance of this season, and definitely one of his best performances of his 7-year run as the Doctor. And I like how vulnerable the Doctor was in the story, because especially in the part when the TARDIS was shrinking, the Doctor was very affected by it, and he was like very weak. He was just very disoriented, and he didn't know what the hell was going on, and that was quite fitting for the story. And obviously the Doctor actually knew that his fourth Earth is basically coming to an end, and he was pretty much glued all doom and gloom and cool dreary for most of the story. But I like how, despite knowing that his life was about to come to an end, he knew that he had to stop the Master by any means necessary, which meant that he knew that what was happening when he spoke to the Watcher, which is the reason why he had Adric and Tegan stay in the TARDIS, and before Tegan decided to run out of the TARDIS and stay the Doctor and the Master. I also like the scene when the Doctor and Adric had to jettison Romana's room out of the TARDIS, because I think it was having issues because of the whole thing, and then to like try and escape what they were caught in, but it's the trap set by the Master, and then they didn't want to, but the Doctor thought had to do it because to try and escape, and the Doctor was just quite distraught having to do so, but he had to do it anyway so they can try and like get out of what they were trapped in. So let me talk about the elephant in the room, and that's Tom Baker's the Fourth Doctor's regeneration. And the regeneration sequence was done beautifully, by the way. This is when the Doctor had actually confronted the Master on the telescope, who tells him that the Brief Alliance was just a ploy for the Master to further advance his plans to destroy the universe. And obviously, the Master had pretty much brought the entropy wave into in a CVE, and obviously he would actually like when the Master sent a message saying that if no one obeyed his demands or acknowledged that he pretty much has a hold over the planet, he would pretty much use close the CVE, which would pretty much destroy the Earth. But the Doctor realizes that he can pretty much stop the Master's plans by going outside the gantry and pulling out a cable that pretty much was holding the thing anyways. But the Master realized what the Doctor was doing and decided to and they had like a brief fight on the top of the gantry, but I think the Master actually attacked the Doctor and pretty much went back inside and tilted the gantry, which the Doctor was able to reach into time, was able to reach the cable in time and disconnected it, but the Doctor fell from the gantry and was pretty much hanging onto the wire. And whilst the Doctor was like hanging on, he was started remembering all the enemies that he faced during his fourth life, such as the Daleks, Cybermen, the Cade Master, Centaurans, Zygon, Davros, the Black Pirate, the Black Guardian, and oddly enough, the Pirate Planet. So the pirate captain from the Pirate Planet, for some odd reason. He's able to grab a hold of one of the railings, but he loses his grip and pretty much falls to his death. And then whilst the Master escapes into his TARDIS, Nissa, Tegan, and Adric pretty much run to his aid, where they call his name and the Doctor starts remembering all the people that he traveled, the companions that he traveled with, and all the people that pretty much aided him during his life, such as Sarah Jane Smith, Harry Sullivan, the Brig, Leela, K9, and the two Romanas. And he looked very happy and he looked very at peace, knowing that he was able to stop the Master. And he knew, and he was basically saying that he was happy that his life was pretty much over, saying this is the end, but the moment's been prepared for. And then they see the Watcher, and then Nissa comes to the conclusion that the Watcher was the Doctor all the time, and then that's when Tom Baker becomes Peter Davison, and who then sits up smiling. And I think that regeneration in the effect was very beautiful, and as I said, it looked very elegant, peaceful, and quite symbolic. And the symbolism pretty much comes from like how the Doctor's regeneration was very much like he merged with the Watcher, and it was as if like the Watcher looked very mummified, and the Watcher pretty much covered the Doctor's body as if it was like a cocoon or something, and then they had like a bit of a glow, and then suddenly Peter Davison's face started showing, and then the cocoon pretty much faded, and that's how Peter Davison ended up being became the Fifth Doctor. And the moment when the Doctor was starting to remember his enemies and his friends was a very touching callback to the Fourth Doctor, and I quite like that. Waterhouse was great as Adric, and do think Logopolis is also one of his other best stories, and he does actually get to do quite a fair bit in the story. I did like the bit when, in the beginning, he was speaking to the Doctor about the TARDIS, and then how the Doctor was explaining the TARDIS's chameleon circuit powers, or the TARDIS's ability to like blend into its environment thanks to the chameleon circuit, and how they were saying that there was no need to return to Gallifrey because Romana's not with them, the Doctor would, and the Doctor has gone into trouble. And I also liked how well he worked with Nissa and Tegan, and we pretty much saw instances of him working with Nissa well in the Keeper of Trucken, and then obviously add Tegan into the mix. I think it was a very nice trio. And obviously, as I said before, I liked how at the part 2, how Adric was able to help the Doctor escape from police custody by pretending to be hurt, and he attacked the police officer and quickly back inside the TARDIS. Nissa returns in this story, and she was brought to Logopolis by a friend of the Doctor's, who turned out to be the Watcher. She officially joins the TARDIS in this story, and she was briefly controlled by the Master when he was pretending to be Tremas and gave her a bracelet that pretty much put her under his control. She realized Tremas was the Master thanks to the Doctor, and she was distraught that the Master actually killed her father, and was further distraught when the entropy wave pretty much destroyed Traken, and this was when her and Adric were inside the TARDIS in part 4, and and the Watcher had pretty much taken the TARDIS out of time and space. But I think they briefly returned, and they saw the entropy wave just pretty much wiping out different planets and stuff, including Truk and then it was very upsetting for Nissa. And I think Saracen did a very good job in the story, and she acted that scene quite well when she saw that Traken was destroyed. And finally, we have the debut of Tegan Javanka, the self-proclaimed mouth on legs, played by the ever so lovely Janet Fielding. And Tegan is actually the first Earth companion not to come from England, and Janet Fielding herself is Australian, I believe. So, a bit more about Tegan. She's an air stewardess, and she was on her way to Heathrow Airport with her auntie Vanessa driving her to the airport, but the car was having issues and breaks down on the Bonner High Pass. So Tegan found the doctor's TARDIS while she was on her way to the next service station to try and get the tyres pumped, but then she explored the doctor's TARDIS and she ended up in the TARDIS gardens, and I think that's where she saw the other TARDIS as well. And I liked it despite the fact she was very confused, but then she obviously said that I wanted this, and she obviously saying to herself, I did want to speak to the pilot of the ship, the pilot of this ship, because he's obviously not doing a very good job, and that's how. And I like how that pretty much established Tegan's feistiness, so to speak, because other people would have been like, what the hell is going on? But Tegan didn't have that aspect as well, but she still had that sass to her, so to speak. But again, she obviously met the Doctor and Adja because the TARDIS was en route to Logopolis, and when on Logopolis, she found out that the Master had actually killed her auntie Vanessa, and she was very distraught about it. And actually, she decided to stay by the Doctor and the Master's side in part 4. I think Tegan had a very good debut in the story, and it actually took me a while for Tegan to grow on me, even though she was great in Logopolis, but I found her a bit annoying and a bit bitchy and for a good chunk of season 19, but she does grow on me in later seasons, so to speak. But I do think that Tegan overall is a very good companion, and I'll get to a bit more on Tegan during her time at the TARDIS. So we have our sidecast. There weren't that many, but they all served their purpose. So first off, we had the Watcher. He was a strange white figure that was stalking the Doctor and watching the Doctor throughout the entire story, and he pretty much quietly observed the Doctor and his companions. He was also responsible for Nissa being on Logopolis because he sensed it was obviously done for her safety because Traken was going to get wiped out by the entropy wave. He was able to communicate with the Doctor, even though it was unheard, but I think it was telepathic as well. And that's how the Doctor realized who the Watcher was. He was basically a manifestation of the Doctor He was basically a manifestation of the Doctor. And whenever the Doctor's life was about to come to an end, he was able to see the Watcher. And in the expanded media, other versions of other Doctors actually saw the Watcher as well. And I think even the 11th Doctor actually saw the Watcher in one of the comics. So I thought that was very nice. And obviously when the Doctor was about to regenerate, the two merged, and that's how the Doctor that pretty much became the Watcher, so to speak, who then transformed into the 5th Doctor. Then we also had Auntie Vanessa. She was Tegan's auntie, and fun fact, I also do have an Australian auntie called Auntie Vanessa. She was driving to Heathrow, and the car broke down on the Barnet bypass. And when Tegan vanished in the Doctor's TARDIS, and Vanessa also saw the Doctor's TARDIS as well, but then that was obviously the Master's TARDIS, and that's when she was confronted by the Master, and he ended up killing her. And the brief moment she was in, I loved Vanessa, and I loved how she was trying to basically fight off the Master with one of her flat tires, but obviously, as I said before, it was no match for the Master's tissue compression eliminator. And finally, we have the Monitor. He served as the interface of the visitors and other Logopolitans, and he was a good friend of the Doctor's, and he agreed to help the Doctor try and fix his chameleon circuit. He knew the secrets of Logopolis and how they're pretty much fighting off the end of the universe, and that's how the Master found out, and he came to Logopolis to try and destroy Logopolis so he can actually destroy the universe. Yes, and Logopolis was unfortunately destroyed by the entropy wave, which means that the end of the universe was definitely impending, and obviously the Monitor was killed by the entropy wave. The enemy of the story, obviously this was the Master, returning from Traken with a new body. that he stole from the Trakanite Trumas. He then proceeded with his plans to destroy the universe by using an entropy wave. He wanted to destroy Logopolis, which was pretty much responsible for preventing the end of the universe, but he teamed up with the Doctor on the false pretenses to try and stop the entropy wave, but the Master decided to hold the universe hostage by having the entropy wave within the CVE. He pretty much sent a message to the Earth peoples and the other people in the universe saying that if his message would not be acknowledged, then he'll pretty much use the TCE who pretty much used the entropy wave to pretty much kill them. The Doctor was able to stop the Master's plans, but it came at the cost of the Doctor regenerating, and the Master was able to escape unharmed for a brief period of time, and he pretty much returns shortly after the Doctor's regeneration in Logop in Castrovava to attack the policemen and to control Adric in some way, shape, or form. I do think that Logopolis is definitely one of Anthony Ainley's best performances as the Master. He definitely portrayed that side of the Crazy Master quite well, but then obviously I think shortly after season 19, I think the Master the Master that we saw started becoming a bit more like a shadow of its former self, but I think that was pretty much came into full effect even after Peter Davison had actually left the show. But the Master was very good in the story. Anthony Ainley played him very well, but I think in other stories after Peter Davison left, even before Davison left, it was a bit iffy, so to speak. So in terms of faults that Logopolis has, there were quite a few, and I did find the Master's laugh to be quite annoying at times, and I was just thinking, every time he was just giving his evil laugh, I'm just thinking, can we just see the man, because he's just laughing too much. Plus, I think part 4, plus other parts of the story, including like the Logopolis portion of this story, was a bit rushed. I do think that having the Doctor and the Master working together could have been a bit longer. And I honestly think that Logopolis could have worked as a 6-parter, so even though I know John Nathan Turner pretty much said that there should be no Doctor Who story should be more than 6 parts, no more than 4 parts. But I do think that John Nathan Turner could have lifted this rule for this story only, because this is Tom Baker's like epic send off, because he's been a Doctor for like 7 years, and I think he would have deserved something like this at least. He didn't even get a proper final 6-parter because Shada was unfinished, so they pretty much had to make do with. And pretty much Johnny Finch decided to make every single story a 4-parter. But I think if Logopolis is a 6-parter, I think it would have been paced somewhat better, even better than the pacing we got here, and some of the parts wouldn't have felt as rushed. So to conclude, I think Logopolis waves an emotional farewell to the 4th Doctor, and at the same time it brilliantly heralds a start of a new era that will be prevalent in Doctor Who over the next few years. So I gave Logopolis an 8 out of 10. So that's it for our famous Doctor with teeth and curls. It will be a while before we see the 4th Doctor again, and the 4th Doctor actually reprises his role in the 30th anniversary special / the EastEnders crossover Dimensions in Time. He's actually in the 5 Doctors, but he doesn't physically appear in the story because Tom Baker declined to return, which he said to have regretted later on. So John Nathan Turner pretty much decided to use footage from Shada to basically try and claim that the 4th Doctor is in the story. So as I've done with the first 3 Doctors, I'll share my thoughts on the 4th Doctor, a little bit of background on the 4th Doctor and why I think his era is incredible. So, Tom Baker's 7-year run as the Doctor is without a doubt a legendary run, and I don't think that any actor can actually surpass his run as the Doctor. He's a very good Doctor, and it's very hard not to see why he's a very well loved Doctor. The 4th Doctor is an incredible Doctor, and if it wasn't for Tom Baker and the 4th Doctor era, Doctor Who probably wouldn't have been a big part of not just British pop culture, just like pop culture in general, because even after Doctor Who ended in 1989, we definitely did see elements of, but even afterwards, definitely started seeing elements of Doctor Who that were pretty much synonymous with the 4th Doctor's era. So, for example, I think the 4th Doctor appeared in an episode of The Simpsons. Tom Baker was there, but he didn't actually voice the Doctor, but you can actually see him in the background with Doctor Who in one of the science conventions, and I think even in the Big Bang Theory, I think one of the characters was actually dressed up as the Fourth Doctor. I think there's another Netflix show. I think it was called One Day at a Time. I think one of the characters was dressed up as the Fourth Doctor as well, and that was quite. And I think that definitely shows the impact that Tom Baker actually had on the show and part of pop culture. And obviously, Tom Baker himself became even a bigger part of British pop culture, and he even narrated Little Britain, even did some other tidbits here and there outside Doctor Who. And then speaking of Tom Baker, he was a fantastic Doctor, and I will always keep saying this. And he was basically like the David Tennant of classic Who, because obviously both actors are pretty much like the most popular actors of their during their era, and their era was pretty much nostalgia for anyone who grew up in that era. Now, even though I didn't actually grow up in the Tom Baker era, but I did actually grow up watching his stories. He was on UK TV drama, as I said quite a few times on this channel, that it was quite cool to see. And I think as a kid, I definitely loved watching the Fourth Doctor. Even as a teenager, and even as an adult now, I definitely enjoyed watching the Fourth Doctor stories. And obviously, the Fourth Doctor is very erratic, very different to the Third Doctor, who was quite serious. The Third Doctor like let his guard down because of his exile was lifted, and the Doctor is pretty much fun-loving, heroic, serious. No, not necessarily serious. For most of his era, he was more erratic, fun-loving, scatterbrained, because he was pretty much enjoying the fact that the Doctor has his freedom back from the Time Lords. But the Tom Baker actually did have the skills to back up the comedy and the drama, the comedy and the serious aspects, and especially in darker stories like The Brain of Morbius. As even though the comedy was very much ramped up to 11 midway through his era, it did become slightly problematic because a lot of the comedic elements was pretty much starting to outweigh some of the more serious elements, and this was in the Graham Williams era. And obviously, the reason why Tom Baker is so popular because he had a lot of iconic stories airing in his era, such as The Ark in Space, Genesis of the Daleks, Terror of the Zygons, Pyramids of Mars, Seeds of Doom, which I'll pretty much add there for the sake of it. The Deadly Assassin, The Talons of Ring Chiang, and City of Death. All of those stories, plus a bit more, are definitely considered to be one of the finest stories in Doctor Who in the near 60-year history. And Tom Baker was definitely born to play the Doctor, and he played the Doctor superb, and he obviously based the Fourth Doctor on Patrick Troughton's Second Doctor, and without that, I think he definitely stole the opportunity at stealing the show at every aspect. The Fourth Doctor had a great rapport with his companions, and he even married one of them, who was Lalla Ward. But obviously, that marriage didn't last long. But on the other side, Tom Baker was known to be quite infamous and to be difficult to work with, which I think was a result of him suffering from mental health issues, which I did read about, and him not being too happy that he pretty much had to share the spot with other companions, because after Elizabeth Sladen left, he felt that the Doctor should be on his own. But the BBC didn't like that idea, and they thought that the Doctor should have a companion at all times. And as a result, he started disliking some of the other people he was working with after Elizabeth Sladen had left. Aside from Lalla Ward, who he married, but they did have a bit of a tumultuous relationship even whilst they were engaged, and it got worse when they got married. And as a result of Tom Baker's difficultness, he was said to have thrown scripts out the window if he thought they weren't good. He quarreled with a lot of directors, producers, and actors, and even kicked the K9 prop at some points. But I think, Tom Baker himself admitted to being quite difficult on set, and he has said that he regrets doing so, which I admire Tom Baker for saying that, because it's not easy doing a show for 7 years, and it pretty much drains the hell out of you. I think that's why there's the unwritten rule that whoever plays a Doctor cannot stay for beyond 3 seasons, because it can hinder you, so to speak. And as I said, the Tom Baker alone didn't make his era great. He was backed with incredible writers and showrunners, and the pair I would actually credit for making the Tom Baker era so successful was Philip Hinchcliffe, who was who was the showrunner for the producer of Doctor Who from seasons 12 to 14, and whose era is said to have been one of the greatest, who's said to be the Doctor Who's golden era, which I have to agree, because the Philip Hinchcliffe era is definitely one of my favorites from the classic Who, from the classic Who, and Robert Holmes as well, who pretty much wrote a vast majority of the stories I mentioned earlier. And obviously, the Tom Baker era, I think, in my opinion, is definitely like a blueprint of what Doctor Who should be like today. Even though all elements from that was in, there was more popular and New Who came later on in the show, but a good chunk of what we see in New Who is definitely responsible, is definitely because of the Fourth Doctor's era. Aside from the behind the scenes issues that Tom Baker had and the peak the Tom Baker era, I do think that Tom Baker is an incredible doctor, and I have a jelly baby with me right now, but I forgot to bring it out. But I was going to like do a toast with jelly baby, but I'll do that later on. So here's a hypothetical jelly baby to commemorate the Tom Baker era. So this is it for my review for the Tom Baker era. I never thought to actually see the day I'll get to actually finish his reviews, because his era is quite long. But yeah. So join me for Oli Ranks 18, where I'll be ranking all 7 stories of the 18th season. So thank you for watching this review. Please let me know what you thought of Logopolis and this review and the Tom Baker era in general. And if you subscribe to my channel if you haven't done so already, stick around for my special announcement, which will be coming very soon. Until then, see you later.